Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. We have our meeting recording started as well. So thank you everybody for coming to the February 2021 meeting of the Naples chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. My name is Andy Nacarado. I'm the president of the Naples chapter and one of your meeting hosts for tonight. I'm also joined by Wade Gurley, our co-treasurer and co-conservation chair, who is one of the Zoom hosts for tonight, helping let people in from the waiting room. So thank you, Wade. You can see tonight, you're going to meet some of our new board members before we get into our usual Zoom housekeeping. And then I have an exciting series of announcements. I'll talk about some highlights from our chapter's 2020 annual report. I'll tell you more about opportunities for native landscaping consultations, and then some save the dates for programs that are coming up in the next couple of months. And then it'll be time for our feature presentation with our guest speaker tonight. That's Jessica Spickler, a biologist with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And she'll be talking to us about native habitat needs for the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker. Okay, so let's begin by hearing from some of our new board members who have joined the Naples chapter. And I'd like to start off by inviting Connie Nagel, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Excuse me. Hi, I'm Connie Nagel, and I'm the new membership chair. So thank you for the vote of confidence for that. And I look forward to meeting everybody. I'm going to be doing some member interviews, so I hope to reach out to some of you soon and find out a little bit more about you and your interest in Native Plant Society and how we can make the membership group better. So I look forward to meeting a lot of you.
Thanks so much, Connie. Then next, I'd like to invite Becky Troupe, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Becky. I don't know if you can see me because I don't see myself.
I can see you.
Oh, okay, great. I'm co-treasurer with Wade until I've got my wings and can do this on my own. First off, I've passed my background check, so I think that's really a good thing.
Yes, that's excellent.
Yeah. And I do have a lot of interest in native plants, and so I look forward to learning more as I am in this position and get to be up close with the rest of the board. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky. And I'm just doing a quick scroll through to see if we have any other new board members at this time. There may be one or two more joining us a little bit later into the meeting. Okay, so thank you, Connie and Becky, for introducing yourselves. And thank you, everybody, for joining our meeting tonight. So we'll move on ahead for our Zoom housekeeping. Here we go. Okay, so as usual, we do ask that if you're not a presenter, if you would keep your cameras and microphones turned off. So your video, I'm looking for it on my own screen, but your video will be off and your microphone will be muted. And that's just because we are recording tonight's meeting and feature presentation so that other people can watch it later on our chapter's YouTube channel. So even though your camera and your microphone are turned off, you can still see and hear the presentation. It just means that other people won't accidentally see or hear you or something that might be going on around at your home. So we do thank you for your cooperation with that. If at any time you have a question during the meeting or a question for our presenter, feel free to put your questions into the chat feature. So you would type them in there. And then at the end of the feature presentation, we'll address the questions that are there. Or if you don't have access to the chat feature, if you're listening on your phone perhaps, then After the feature presentation, again, you'll be invited to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question that way. Okay, so that should do it for how we run our Zoom meetings. Thank you again for your cooperation on that. Now I'm going to share some highlights from our 2020 annual report for the Naples chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. And as everybody knows, the year 2020 was quite a year, a lot of unusual challenges. But I am proud to say that the Naples chapter was able to adapt to those challenges and make changes where we needed to. And I'm excited to focus on the good things that we were able to accomplish with support from people like you. So everybody knows that we had to decrease the number of events, especially in-person events that we were going to have last year. But despite that, the Naples chapter was able to offer 13 educational programs last year with about 250 live attendees. And I say live attendees as opposed to people watching on a recording because most of those programs were virtual, they were offered online. So we're having good success transitioning to Zoom meetings for sharing educational information about native plants, for the time being, as long as we need to. We've also had great reach and great support in social media. You can see we've surpassed 1,000 Facebook followers for the Naples chapter of the Native Plant Society, which is remarkable. And we have a wonderful chapter volunteer named Alicia who manages the Facebook page for us. So if you have not found our chapter on Facebook yet, we're at FNPS Naples, and you got to check us out. You can see also that the Naples chapter by the end of 2020 has 92 members, and that's an increase by 20 people compared to the end of 2019. So that's very exciting. And of those 92 members, it includes 2 of our business members. So that's Cypress Cove Landkeepers and Naples Botanical Garden. So thank you again for all of the members for supporting us over the last year. And I think I'm going to say that at least 2 more times before this summary is over. But it's important to say because we really are thankful. In 2020, we created a new logo for the Naples chapter. So you can see in the top left corner there. And our logo is featuring the native tropical royal blue water lily, which is one of the water lilies native here in Collier County. We also launched a new website early in 2020. So if you haven't checked that out, fnpsnaples.org, and that website address will come up plenty of times on the slides as well. Also managed by another chapter volunteer named Michael, and it's an amazing place to go for resources about native plants in Collier County, and also to see our schedule of upcoming events. In 2020, we formed 2 new partnerships. A little bit earlier in the year, that was with one of our business members, Cypress Cove Landkeepers. So they are a new conservation nonprofit that's located in the Golden Gate Estates area. And then more recently, a new partnership between the Naples chapter and Collier County Parks and Recreation. So that one is in the very early planning phases of what our partnership is going to mean to the community. But definitely keep your eyes and ears open for opportunities coming up between the Naples chapter and these 2 other organizations. Also, of course, leading up to the November 2020 election, the Naples chapter was proud to endorse the passage of the Conservation Collier referendum, which of course reestablished funding to purchase and maintain preserved land in the county. So that was another great one. Then also, of course, because we had to decrease our in-person events, we had less of an impact in some areas. You can see We were only able to have one native plant sale last year, so those numbers are down, as well as the number of landscaping consults and field trips. But with things going virtual and having online meetings and having to share more information online, there's a lot of behind the scenes hours that go into that. So the Naples chapter alone recorded over 400 volunteer hours in the last year, and that helped make a lot of these accomplishments possible. And we also elected 7 board members, and you got to meet a few of them so far tonight. And I believe I saw one more board member has joined us. So at this time, I'll invite Karen Allman, if she's ready, to introduce herself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm Karen Allman. I'm in the position of secretary for the board as well as the outreach. So I will hopefully be planning all kinds of interesting things for you all to volunteer for in the coming season, no matter what it looks like. Hopefully not as much virtual, but we'll see how everything goes in the world. But overall, I'm excited to be back on the board. I did take a break last year, but I'm very proud of everything that Andy and everyone has done. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to it.
Thanks so much, Karen. Okay, so something else that we did in the last year is we put out a survey to Naples chapter members to find out what everybody was most interested in accomplishing through the Naples chapter over the next 3 years. And these would all be activities that are in line with the Florida Native Plant Society's mission and our chapter's mission to preserve, conserve, and restore Florida's native plants. So it came down to 6 objectives or goals that we're going to focus on. So things like volunteering for land management days at local natural areas, offering native landscaping consultations to homeowners. That's come up a couple of times tonight, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a couple of slides. We want to plan frequent native plant sales. We want to participate in community events, focusing on virtual or outdoors for now. And we want to offer educational programs designed specifically for diverse community organizations and including organizations that are not environmentally focused. So we move beyond preaching to the choir of people who already really care about native plants in our environment. We want to reach more and more people. As well as programs designed for children and young adults, so kindergarten through 12th grade students, as well as college students. So in that way as well, we're broadening the reach for teaching about native plants to younger audiences as well. So if any of these particular goals or activities is really speaking to you, I encourage you to reach out to the Naples chapter. Naples Native Plants at fnps.org is our email, and that will show up on a later slide as well. And just let us know what you're interested in helping with. That would be great. Then to wrap up the 2020 report with our treasurer's report, you can see our deposits, the money in, was slightly greater than the expenditures or the costs. And you can see, you might have to collapse your video like me to be able to see the end of year balance slightly below $9,000. But for a very challenging year, you know, we're holding steady with our finances, so we're happy about that. And just a big thank you one more time to all of the Naples chapter members and donors who have supported our chapter and our mission-driven activities over the last year. If you know it's coming up time for you to renew your membership or you're thinking about joining for the first time, I encourage you to go to fnps.org. That's the main website for the Florida Native Plant Society, and click on join, and that'll take you to the membership form. always looking for more members. So thanks again, everybody. So here's a little bit more about the Native Landscaping Consultations. The Naples chapter is currently seeking volunteers who want to be involved with these consultations. So how do they work? What really is a Native Landscaping Consultation? Well, a Naples chapter member who would like to learn what native plants they already have in their yard or might be interested in adding more native plants to their landscaping would like a small group of volunteers from the Naples chapter to come to their property and take a look around and identify native plants that are already present, suggest native plants that they think would do well on that particular member's property. And it's really a benefit to everybody involved, whether you're the member receiving the consultation for your own property, or if you're volunteering to help generate information about the native plants that are there or could be added. It's a really great way for everybody to learn together. So if you'd be interested in giving or receiving a native landscaping consultation, here's our email address on the screen now. Just send us an email to naplesnativeplants@fnps.org. We'd love to hear from you. All right, the announcements are coming to a close, I promise. Here's our upcoming programs. You can see later this month on Saturday, February 20th, we do have a members field trip to Picayune Strand State Forest. And this field trip is associated with the topic of tonight's presentation, the native habitat needs for red-cockaded woodpeckers. You see on the screen there, this field trip is currently full. We're keeping the group size very small for the time being. But if you go to our website to RSVP for the field trip, you can be added to a waiting list if that's something you're interested in doing. And on the next screen, I'll show you what our website looks like. A month from today, we have our next chapter meeting. We are planning it still to be online on Zoom. That's going to be Wednesday, March 3rd. There's something a little bit different about next month's meeting. You're able to join half an hour earlier at 6 o'clock for optional social time. So this will be very casual time for members and guests just to talk to each other, say hi. There might be people you haven't really had a chance to see since our in-person meetings had to end for the time being. So if you want to join early at 6 o'clock, you can do some socializing. And then at our usual 6:30 time, that's when the meeting will officially begin. And it'll have the feature presentation, Native Orchid Propagation and Restoration at Naples Botanical Garden, which will be presented by Nick Avey, and he is their Director of Collections. So that'll be another great program to look forward to. And the last date I have for you for now is Saturday, March 20th. That's going to be our next chapter work day at Cutting Horse Eco Center. And if you haven't been to this eco center yet, it is a native plant nursery and native plant demonstration garden in Bonita Springs that is managed by the Cockaloba chapter of the Native Plant Society. And they've invited our chapter to continue doing work days there. So you see March 20th is our next date. And we could do things like weeding in the demonstration gardens, potting up plants in the nursery, or helping to make native plant sales. So it's a really great experience builder for our chapter as we move towards planning our own native plant sales. So keep an eye out for the newsletter that'll be coming out at the end of the month. It'll have an RSVP form if you're interested in the workday. And now here's what the homepage of our website looks like. You can see in the top right corner, there is a Join Us button. So if you want to become a member, renew, we do have a button on our own website. And if you are not yet getting our e-newsletter, there's a link here to receive the newsletter. It comes out once a month, and it has all of the meetings and field trips and activities that are going to be coming up over the next month or two. And again, fnpsnaples.org is our website. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for your attention during the announcements today and listening to our annual report. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening. Her name is Jessica Spickler. She is a biologist with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and she'll be presenting about native habitat needs for the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker. So now I'll stop sharing my screen here, and Jessica can start sharing her screen.
All right, let me pick the right screen. All right, can you see this screen?
Yes, looks good.
All right, we'll put it in presentation mode. All right, everyone. Hello, and thanks for inviting me to talk to you guys about woodpeckers. It's something that I certainly enjoy doing as part of my job. My name is Jessica Spickler, like Andy had mentioned. I've been working with red-cockaded woodpeckers for about 7.5 years now, and have really enjoyed working in South Florida specifically just because of all of the unique challenges and the unique type of pine habitat that we have down here. So let's get right into what I'm going to talk to you guys about. I wasn't sure if there was going to be a video, so I wanted you to see what I look like at my best in the field. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about is the brief ecology of the red-cockaded woodpecker, which I will very frequently say RCW, and that's just like our little acronym that makes it much easier to say. I'll go over general biology, habitat needs, and how to identify them if you happen to come across them in the woods. Then I'll go and talk a little bit about the specific habitat characteristics in Southwest Florida here, you know, and some of the areas that we have locally with RCWs, as well as the difference between our South Florida /pine and other areas with RCWs. And then last, I'm going to wrap up by kind of talking about how we as FWC and biologists across agencies monitor and manage for RCWs and their habitat. And that deals a lot with habitat management, population monitoring for the actual birds, and outreach such as this. So let's get right into it. Red-cockaded woodpeckers. They are a small little black and white bird, about 7 to 9 inches long, so not very big at all. Males have a red cockade, which is what gives them their name. You can kind of, can you see my mouse if I move it around? Guys.
Yes, we can see your mouse.
I just want to make sure. Okay, so this is the red cockade for which the woodpecker is actually named. It's just a small tuft of red feathers right above that white cheek patch. They were listed as an endangered species in 1970. Their decline was, you know, pretty substantial from the 98 million acres of longleaf pine forest that used to occur in the Southeast. Only about 3% of that remains now. A little bit more actually was there in 1970 when they were listed, but a huge factor in their decline was, you know, widespread habitat destruction. They have been proposed to be downlisted as of 2020 to threatened, so they will still be federally listed, but only as threatened versus endangered. And the estimated current population is about 7,800 breeding pairs. They are found in mature woodlands throughout, or mature pine woodlands specifically throughout the southeastern United States. So they range as far to the west as East Texas, and as far to the east as West Virginia, if you can keep up with that. And then they do get as far north as parts of Arkansas. They do have a preference for longleaf pine where it occurs. However, they do occupy others such as our South Florida slash, as well as pond pine, loblolly pine, shortleaf pine, etc., in the areas where they occur overlapping with the longleaf pine. So complex social structure these guys have. They're cooperative breeders, which actually means that on a territory there will be a breeding pair and then several non-breeding but sexually mature adults. And those are usually the male offspring from previous years. They'll stay on and help their parents raise future nestlings. And the idea there is that they actually have better fitness by doing that than they would by trying to strike out on their own and make their own territory. So eventually, you know, when the breeding male dies, one of those young males can then take over that position in the cluster. They are non-migratory, and they do defend that territory on a year-round basis. So a unique thing about RCWs, they are the only North American woodpecker species that excavates into living pine trees. So living trees are significantly harder than dead pine trees. The wood is not as soft, so it takes a very long time to excavate these cavities. You know, on average, it's between 1 and 3 years. But that also means that once the cavity is complete, they last a very long time because the wood is not going to rot away or be burned up at the next fire. So since it's in a living tree, that cavity will last sometimes for generations within a woodpecker family. This also has been their primary limitation in recovery because they require old pine trees to excavate their cavities into. So they do prefer trees that are, you know, 80 years or so older, just for several reasons. You know, one is obvious, it's a larger diameter at the appropriate height for a cavity. So young trees that are only, you know, 30, 40 years old are not large enough in diameter at a sufficient height for a safe cavity for nestlings. Also, there is a specific fungus that infects the heartwood within the pine tree. It's called heart rot fungus appropriately, and it softens up that heartwood just a little bit, so it makes it easier for the woodpecker to excavate the tree. And the heart rot fungus is actually non-lethal to the pine tree itself, so that won't affect how long the pine tree can persist on the landscape. Another advantage to using a living pine tree is that they can create resin wells, which is a unique feature of RCWs. You can see here on this picture with the honeybees, that thick, sticky resin flowing down the tree. And so red-cockaded woodpeckers will actually drill these small holes all around their cavity entrance and cause that sap to bleed out and make that tree really sticky. And that is a predator defense. So something like a rat snake wouldn't be able to climb up into the cavity and get nestlings or an adult that is roosting. So it's pretty neat. And I actually was told by a beekeeper that the reason that these bees are harvesting this particular sap is actually for structural components within the hive. I had no idea that this was a thing until I saw honeybees harvesting this one day. So I thought that was a very unique, fun fact. One thing about sap, however, is it is highly flammable, which kind of leads perfectly into the next topic. The longleaf pine system and also our South Florida slash pine system is a fire-dependent ecosystem, meaning that RCWs themselves are a fire-dependent species. So they require that open park-like habitat where it's, you know, mostly dominated overstory of pines with like a couple shrubs here and there, but not really a lot of mid-story. But then it's got that dominant grass and herbs understory. These are maintained usually by pretty short fire cycles, so somewhere on the order of 2 to 5 years, depending on the soil type and the weather pattern in the area. Fire suppression, in addition to habitat destruction, was a secondary major cause of further decline of the species, because all fire was bad fire for a good couple of decades there. So until we started reintroducing prescribed burns into these areas, the habitat was just completely overgrown. Woody midstory not only encroaches on their cavities, but also the fewer types of herbs, forbs, and grasses there are, the lower the diversity of arthropods there is, which is what the RCWs actually feed on. So it's very important to maintain that kind of short fire cycle. And here you can actually see a red-cockaded woodpecker cavity tree that was burned over in a wildfire, and the tree survived just fine because the slash pines are evolved to deal with this as a pressure. So yeah, that tree was perfectly fine. the birds went ahead and nested in it, and I actually abandoned nestlings in this tree like 3 weeks after that fire photo was taken. So a little quiz here. And normally if I have this slide up and I'm in a room of people, I ask people to point at which bird they think is a male bird. So I won't be able to do that today, but what I can do is kind of point around here. It's a trick question. So I've already shown you this image. So he's a male because he has this red cockade. This one doesn't really have a cockade. However, it's got this huge red dot on its head. And that is actually a male fledgling. When they leave the nest for the first few months, male offspring won't have a cockade. Instead, they will have this big patch on the top of their crown. And this bird here is also a male. And I know that because of his band combination. So the red cockade is here's the moral of the story, is a very bad field mark. Use that white cheek patch, because unless the bird is excited or angry about me holding it, you really won't see that red cockade very often. It's hidden under these black feathers that make up the cap. So just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's a female for sure. So yeah, that's how you would identify them. That big white cheek patch is your #1 clue. Some of the other species that I frequently get asked about, or people tell me they've seen a red-cockaded woodpecker, they'll show me pictures of downy woodpeckers and hairy woodpeckers, which are superficially very, very similar, and they're much more common down here in South Florida. Downy woodpeckers is like one of the #1 woodpecker backyard birds, other than maybe red-bellieds. But they're also small and black and white, but pay attention to that cheek line. They have a black line that runs through their cheek, and they also have a white stripe down their back, which the RCW doesn't have. The RCW has that nice ladder stripe on their back. Other woodpeckers that get confused with them sometimes are yellow-bellied sapsuckers, which are seasonally here, so they spend the wintertime with us. Red-bellied woodpeckers is one that I get told a lot, oh, I've got that in my yard, and it usually is a red-bellied woodpecker. And then to a lesser degree, red-headed woodpeckers. And then these two almost never get confused with RCWs, but they are other woodpecker species that can be found easily here in South Florida. All right, so now I'm going to go into some habitat characteristics in Southwest Florida specifically. First, I'm going to show you guys a map. These are some of the RCW populations that we have here in South Florida. As you can see here in Southwest Florida, we've got Picayune Strand State Forest, the Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge, and Big Cypress National Preserve. There are also several other areas in South Florida that you can visit. Another very popular one to see is the Babcock-Webb WMA, as well as the ranch. And there's actually 2 new properties that have red-cockaded woodpeckers as of last fall. So we have reintroduced the species to areas that they were previously extirpated from, so meaning that they were somehow killed off in those areas. And that is Hungryland WEA, which is right around in this area, as well as Jonathan Dickinson State Park. So both of those properties now have woodpeckers as well. And so that was very exciting. I just haven't had a chance to update my map here yet. So Big Cypress National Preserve, I'm sure many of you guys have spent time there. It is a beautiful place, one of my favorite places that I've ever worked, actually probably my favorite place that I've ever worked. We have here the largest RCW population in South Florida, and we are also the southernmost in the entire species range. The RCW did used to range as far south as Homestead in kind of the Long Pine Key area of Everglades National Park, but they were last observed there in the 40s, 50s, or 60s when that area was heavily logged. So we are currently the southernmost extent of the species, and we've got 120 sites out there that kind of span a large middle section of the preserve. We also have some groups on Picayune Strand State Forest. So a much smaller population. We've only got 16 cluster sites. And cluster, if I haven't explained it yet, is actually a group of trees that one family group will use. So if I use that term, that's just what I'm referring to, is the group of trees that belongs to one family of birds. This population is pretty easily accessed from Naples and is where we will be having the field trip on February 20th. So some of the unique characteristics of South Florida slash pine habitat are that it has a much wider range of hydrology tolerances. So a lot of pine can handle some water for some amount of the year, but hydrology here in South Florida, as we know, is very seasonal and it's very wet. You know, once the sheet flow starts up in the Big Cypress area, things can get pretty soupy for quite a while. So being able to tolerate months of inundation versus just a few weeks is one of the unique things that South Florida slash pine exhibits. And the images that I've actually showed you here are purposefully some of my most hydric sites. So you can see here, it's all pretty much grass. This is actually a sawgrass slough out here. Right on the edge of the Everglades, I can actually use an airboat to access this site in the summer. This site as well, you know, very, very few and far between with palmetto. It's mostly just grasses and it's, you know, different kinds of wetland adapted grasses. And then this site up here is very patchy habitat types, very characteristic of Big Cypress, where you've got like a pine island surrounded by some shortgrass prairie. There's a depressional wetland, and here's a little bit of cypress starting to grow up. This is very characteristic of large portions of the Big Cypress National Preserve. So it's very unique down here. A lot of other areas with pines are very continuous forests that may have a few hardwood drains here and there, but it's much, much more matrixed and fragmented here as far as the habitat type. Slash pine does have several fire adaptations similar to longleaf, so it has a grass stage, meaning that for the first couple years of its life, it is pretty fire tolerant as it's low to the ground. However, it is pretty easily overgrown by things like palmetto and cabbage palm when drainage occurs, which has been very common and prevalent down here in South Florida, and also with fire suppression. So it still needs that fire to maintain itself as like an open understory. And I've already talked about matrices. So what do we do to actually monitor and manage for RCWs in South Florida? So this is getting into kind of what my job is. And the number one thing to do managing this habitat is to manage it at a landscape scale. And the way that we do that predominantly is with fire. So managing with fire is probably our most cost-effective and natural way of getting things done. We can't always burn. So especially for reintroducing fire to an area that has been long dormant and has been long unburned, it usually has a quite high fuel load underneath. And if you burn habitat with a large fuel load underneath, you risk killing the pine trees. So in these before and after shots here, you can see before the habitat was mulched, and then actually a skid steer mulcher was used to actually mulch the habitat ahead of a fire, so that that fire is significantly less intense, but still meets the goals of restoring that habitat. Additionally, you can see in this lower left picture here, some of the considerations that we take for RCW trees specifically. Because those cavities are such a valuable resource, we actually have them cleared around or clear around them ourselves in order to prevent that fire from being very intense at the base of those trees. And if you'll remember back, I said that the sap flowing on active trees is very flammable, and it can actually run up into the crown of the fire can actually run up into the crown of the trees if the fire gets to the base. So we're just trying to prevent that. You know, yes, these areas evolved with fire. Yes, this species evolved with fire, but at this point, the bird is endangered and we are trying to promote population growth. So anything that we can do to protect their most valuable resource in their cavity is what we end up doing. Some of the other things that we do is actually manage for plant species. And notice I didn't say invasive species, because we are also managing native cabbage palms. Even though they're our state tree, They are really pervasive down here. I'm sure many of you know and have seen some of the monocultures of palm that we have in Picayune Strand State Forest. And so we actually do have several different programs that will either mulch them or selectively target them with herbicide, following that up with the burn. And that's what you can see here. My colleague actually took this photo of me. This is the best one I could find that shows you each of these individual cabbage palms has been treated with a backpack sprayer. So somebody actually goes to each and every one of those palms and gets rid of them. And so after a burn comes through, that area it looks so great. And they're still palm trees. I mean, they're a native component to the habitat, but they're at a much, much more appropriate density. We also do deal with invasive species, of course. As an example, this is Melaleuca here that actually came up in a very vast carpet after a wildfire occurred in Big Cypress in 2018. And so this, because all of the understory had been burned to the soil level, the wind dispersed Melaleuca just took off like crazy in large areas. Hundreds of acres of Big Cypress was covered in 6 to 12 inch Melaleuca sapling seedlings. So that's been a huge ordeal that they've been dealing with. We had something similar happen to Picayune after the Lee Williams fire in 2017. Where that northern area off of Beck Boulevard just got completely hammered by the fire, and subsequently all the seed bank for the Melaleuca was released. Other species that we deal with commonly are Cogan Grass and to a lesser degree Caesar weed. It doesn't seem to be as much of a problem in our area specifically, but it can be a problem where it occurs. So some of the other management techniques that we do for the birds specifically outside of their habitat are actually cavity management. So we actually provide them with artificial cavities. So what we'll do is we'll select a nice tree that's large enough to accept a cavity. And then we'll actually climb with a ladder, put in a chainsaw, and actually put in a prefabricated box that's already drilled, and then we camouflage it with putty and spray paint, and you can't even tell that it wasn't part of the tree to begin with. What takes the woodpecker 1 to 3 years takes us about 30 minutes. So it really provides good immediate habitat for them for roosting and nesting, and they readily take to this. I've had colleagues tell me that as they are chainsawing the hole into the tree, the birds are nearby, and as they're leaving for the day, they see the bird go check out the cavity. So they definitely, they use these cavities, and in many populations, such as Picayune, heavily rely on them because the trees aren't quite old enough in enough places. And these can be inserted into younger trees so long as the diameter is appropriate to receive the box. All right, another kind of cavity that we like to put in is a drilled cavity. These are much more natural looking and can go into much smaller, older trees. So in areas that already have woodpeckers, these are ideal. It's actually my preferred cavity for Big Cypress because the trees out there are so much smaller in diameter than the ones in Picayune. You actually go out with a gas-powered drill and drill out an entrance tunnel and then go up a little higher and drill down and kind of make a little light bulb shape to give them a really good head start. So, and then we do have to screen these off for 4 weeks to allow the sap to heal up so that we're not entrapping woodpeckers, because that's certainly not the goal of giving them habitat, is, you know, creating a sticky fly trap for them. But yeah, these are really great in areas that are already occupied because a woodpecker that's living right there will find this and be like, oh, wow, this is an almost completed cavity. Let me finish it up and I can move in there. They're not really great for initially recruiting birds to an area that's unoccupied though, because they're not ready-made. Even though we try our best to embrace our inner woodpeckers, we can't get the cavity quite ready for roosting with the limited tools that we have. So they still have to do a little bit of work after we're finished. So after we provide all of these different management or do all of these different management techniques for the woodpeckers, how do we know we've done a good job? we monitor them pretty extensively depending on what population we're in. And what exactly does monitoring entail? The predominant way that we figure out how many birds there are is we do nest monitoring. And so what that involves, starting in about April, we actually go to every known active cavity tree with a camera that's on a telescoping pole, and we inspect every cavity to see if we can find some eggs. Once eggs are found, even though there could be several active roost trees within one cluster site, there's only going to be one nest. So after we find the nest, we only have to continue inspecting that one tree. And this is a peeper pole and a peeper camera. That's what it's our official lingo. That's what we call it. And so we use our peeper cam to look at all of these guys. And here you can see this was a 3-egg nest, also a very short cavity. It's very useful for taking a picture, but the reality is that pole goes up 50 feet. And sometimes we do need to extend it all the way. All right, and so once we know that we have a nest, we continue to monitor it until the chicks hatch, after which we actually go and climb the tree to extract the woodpecker's nestlings. So that involves using a lineman's climbing belt and ladders and a good deal of gumption to get to the top of that cavity, especially when the wind is swaying and the cavity tree is really skinny on top. But it's a fun job. I enjoy it. And once we get the nestlings out, we band them. So here's a couple images of that. These guys are between 7 and 10 days old when we band them, and they'll receive a USGS numbered band that is unique to that individual in the entire world. So USGS issues strings of bands with unique numbers on them. And so if that bird is ever caught in another area or found dead somewhere, that number can be tied to that specific bird. Additionally, what we do is we put 4 plastic colored leg bands on as well, and that allows us to individually identify them too. So that allows us to do it without recapturing them, because you can't read the tiny little number on the band with a spotting scope, even the best spotting scope. So it just gives us a really great way of just finding the woodpeckers and tracking them through life, and also seeing where they move within our population, because we'll be able to identify that specific bird again. Sometimes we miss the nestlings, and we actually have to track down and capture adults that don't have bands. Sometimes also their bands will fall off. The plastic will wear out and open up and fall off, and then we'll have to recapture them and replace those plastic bands. It doesn't happen a whole lot, but it happens enough that, it's a technique that we need to do. And yeah, all these pictures that I've showed you guys so far are of this pristine, dry, wonderful conditions with no mosquitoes and everything. But the reality is that this is what it looks like for most of the season when I'm out in Big Cypress. So although I'm trying to show you like best case scenario photos, definitely South Florida is unique in that we have to access with unique machines, and we spend a very large portion of the year with our feet very wet. All right, and so the last big management strategy that we have in our back pocket that will help kind of grow populations that are struggling is translocation. So what that means is we'll actually go to large, healthy populations that are stable and take juveniles who have hatched earlier in that year, and then we'll move them overnight to a new area that doesn't currently have woodpeckers or has a very small population of woodpeckers. We'll place them in cavity trees that were installed by the land managers on site, and then in the morning we release them. And so this has been a really great strategy. There's actually an entire Southeastern Range co-op. We call it it's like a swap meet almost, where everybody gets together and there's a large pool of donor sites and donor pairs, and then a large pool of recipient sites and how many pairs they would like on each of their sites. And so we hash out who gets which birds and how many, and it's a very great meeting. I really enjoy that. And the benefit goes straight to the birds, because all of these populations that don't really need their woodpeckers to continue having a healthy population can give them to struggling small populations or complete new reintroduced populations. So I'll close out here with a video, and I hope that it works for you guys. But to give you some background here on this video here, so it may be a little hard to see, but this is a new cavity tree on Jonathan Dickinson State Park. And there's a little string. Let me see if I can get my mouse to come back. So this little string right here is attached to this biologist. And on the other side of that is a screen where the woodpecker has been safely screened into that cavity overnight so that it can't get out and get lost at night and potentially be picked off by a predator like an owl. And so what we do is after we put them into bed at night, we'll come out first thing in the morning before the woodpeckers even wake up and wait for them to start pecking on that screen. And then we coordinate because there's always a pair released into a site. And I'll coordinate with whoever I'm with and we count off and then we both pull our screens and then some magic usually happens. And let's see if that magic will play for you guys. All right, and so that was actually the first moment that those woods had heard RCW's calling since 1983, because they had been extirpated from the park at that time. So, you know, they had kept their habitat up, they have beautiful pine flatwoods, and through a very large collaborative effort, we were able to reintroduce the species last, I believe it was October, November timeframe. So it's one of my favorite parts of the job is, you know, being able to contribute to the long-term viability of the species. So with that, oh no, last topic here is outreach. So that's one of the more important things that I do as well. I don't get to do it a whole lot as part of my job, but for the past several years, I have led a field trip out at the Rcw Bay or for the Rcw Bay Birding Festival that happens each January. They did go virtual this year as a result of the pandemic, completely understandable. And previously what I would do is I talked to a group about woodpeckers and then I would take them out into Big Cypress and, you know, do a little bit of a bird walk and then end in an RCW cluster so that they could see the birds keep coming in. Other outreach activities that I've done in the past have actually been to take an artist out. So I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Deb Mitchell, but she has a collection of wild observations that she's doing across South Florida. And so I was actually able to take her out as part of her work with the Florida Master Naturalist Society, as well as, you know, her own exhibitions that she's doing. So she's been an artist in residence at Big Cypress before, and she's got a couple exhibits at the Miami International Airport, as well as working with Archbold recently and Everglades National Park. And so this is just an example of some of the things that she has done as a result of coming out with me on a little field trip to get her to be able to then expose others to the red-cockaded woodpecker. So I think they're very unique opportunities. They don't come very often. I really enjoy them. I love talking to people about woodpeckers. I hope that came through a little bit for you guys tonight. So yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to come out and talk to you guys about woodpeckers. And at this time, I will take any of your questions.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Excellent presentation. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, so I can read them to you.
All right.
We have a question from Becky. If the pine woodlands are decreased from the area available in 1970, how can the population of RCWs have been sufficiently stable to no longer be endangered? So I wonder if Becky, you're talking about the proposal to downlist last year, perhaps?
Yeah, so I think I know what she means. So the habitat continued to decrease from the 70s until about the 90s. So they were listed in 1970. But what's happened is a lot of areas have been restored through fire and mechanical means and herbicide treatment, et cetera. So habitat has started growing in acres again. So it certainly will never reach the 3 million or the 98 million acres across the Southeast that it once was, and that's completely unrealistic. But we have been able to sort of defragment them a little bit. And, you know, that's just decades, 5 decades of dedication from biologists much farther before me. You know, I've only been doing it for the last 7 years. But yeah, that's I think their main sticking point there is that we have been able to grow the population significantly from its listing point, and therefore it warrants downlisting.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from Karen. What other types of things have you observed inside cavities when conducting monitoring? She gives the example of perhaps bonneted bats. And then she has a follow-up question, but go ahead with the first.
Okay, no, that's actually a really excellent question. So I didn't put that as part of my presentation because I was risking making it too long, but RCWs are considered a keystone species. They do provide habitat for other species as a result of their cavities. So after a woodpecker is finished using their cavity, so many other birds will use that cavity as a nest cavity. I don't know how common the prevalence is for Florida bonneted bats specifically, but I do know of at least one instance of them using a cavity at Avon Park bombing range. A couple of them were found in an old abandoned RCW cavity. I have found snakes. I have found barking tree frogs. I have found mosquitoes, which is not exactly what you want to be seeing in your cavities, but the ones, if they hold a little bit of water, I've seen mosquito larvae and all kinds of different things. So yeah, there's definitely a lot. Actually, an old cavity got so blown out that a honeybee hive was actually sticking out of it. So I've seen a lot of different things using RCW cavities. They're very important for the landscape.
Very interesting. Thank you. Karen's second question was, is there a sense of what native grasses are preferred, or is it pretty much as long as the understory is open, they are happy with foraging?
So as far as the specific species, I'm actually not really sure in South Florida. I am a terrible botanist. I will completely be honest with you guys, which will be apparent in the next few slides that I show you here. But I know that in the longleaf ecosystem, wiregrass is one of the dominant understory types that actually indicates a healthy and complete ecosystem. So we don't have longleaf down here. It kind of peters out around the Babcock Webb area. We do have wiregrass, so, and I do see that in there, but it's not as prevalent as it is, say, in you know, North Georgia or not North Georgia, North Florida, South Georgia area, where it's just almost monoculturous, it seems. But you know, there is really high plant diversity in those communities. It's one of the richest biota and plant diversities in the United States, I think. So I'm sorry I can't be more helpful on specific grass species here in South Florida, but maybe one of you guys can show me what kind of species are out there.
Yes, no worries about that. Grasses can be quite difficult to identify. We have 2 questions from CJ. First, have any of the relocated RCWs returned on their own to their original habitat?
So that can happen if you don't translocate them far away enough from their original habitat. So for example, we do both interpopulation and intrapopulation, and that's just fancy for within population and between population movements. So if you're moving birds within a population, you should make sure that they're, you know, many, many miles apart from each other, because they will just find their way right back home. This is one of the predominant reasons that we only move juveniles, because they have not yet become highly territorial onto that natal territory yet. So they actually are much more successful at being relocated to a new area and then adopting that area as their own home. But yeah, there have definitely been instances of birds that were translocated and then they either showed back in the place that they came from, or they showed up in a completely different population. You know, a couple years later, you find a bird and you're like, who is this? And then they get caught, the band number gets read, and you're like, wow, this bird came all the way from Fort Benning, Georgia, or wherever it happens to be.
That was a good question. CJ's follow-up was, so if they have returned to their original habitat, were they relocated back to the new site?
No,
something-
you know, once the birds pick their spot, that's their spot. Like if you move them, there's a high likelihood that if you move them again, they're just going to do the same thing. So it's better to just pick a different bird to move.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a question from Lorraine. What's the best season for prescribed burns and why?
So for the South Florida pine habitat and just in general, that growing season fire is really going to be what's beneficial to the flora in the area. So it gives us the best results as far as species diversity. Some grasses won't even seed unless they're burned during the growing season. It also is better at promoting those herbs versus the woody plants. So it's better at killing off the woody plants, especially if it's early growing season burning. But on the other hand, depending on how long it has been since fire, it may be better to burn it in the dormant season when it's cooler, just so that you don't overcook these pine trees, because the last thing you want to do is provide them with too much heat and then kill them. So, you know, as a general rule for an intact system, growing season trumps all. However, like depending on where you are in the restoration and maintenance phase of a specific area, it could be more beneficial to do a dormant season a couple times before you move then back into a growing season rotation.
Very good. Thank you for that. We have one more question from Becky in the chat. She asks, what kinds of arthropods are in their diet?
So if it's a bug on a tree, I'm sure they'll eat it. But they do predominantly eat ants, wood roaches, wood-boring beetles, and any other kinds of things that they'll find on like bark spiders, etc. So those are the predominant sources of protein for those guys. They will somewhat eat pine seeds. I've seen them foraging on pine cones before to get the pine seeds out. Less common here in South Florida than up in the longleaf system where I've worked previously. The pine nuts are a little bit bigger and meatier up there, so I think that probably has something to do with it.
Very good. Thank you. If anybody is thinking of a question that they haven't asked yet, go ahead and put it in the chat, or you may unmute yourself if you don't have access to the chat. And I have one question I'd like to ask you, Jessica.
All right.
So I was wondering, I wrote down a few things. I have to pick one. And you may have mentioned at the beginning, so if you did and I missed it, I apologize. What is it about pine trees and not some other type of tree that makes the pines preferable for the RCWs for their cavities?
That is a really good question. I don't think I've been asked that before.
Oh,
I think that it is a softwood tree versus a hardwood tree. So that may, you know, even though they are harder as living trees versus dead trees, they are still softer than a hardwood tree would be. You know, maybe the sap leaking out of a pine tree is significantly stickier than, say, an oak tree's sap would be. Yeah, I get they just evolved in this particular habitat type. So it's hard to say what exactly attracted the first RCW ancestor to a pine tree.
I was wondering if maybe it had to do with the sap or something else that I hadn't thought about. We have one more question in the chat, but if anybody was unmuting themselves to ask a question, I'll be quiet for a few seconds. Okay, I'll go ahead and ask. This will be our last question in the chat. because I know you have some questions for us, which will be exciting. Let's see here. Okay, and another question came in at the last moment as well. So from Lorraine, we have, is there a section in their brains that is different than non-woodpecker birds?
Section in their brains than different. Okay, so I believe you might be alluding to some specific modifications that they have that allow them to smash their face into a tree without getting brain damage. And so the answer is yes. There's actually several things that are different about woodpecker heads in general that make them adapted to be able to hammer into a tree with significant G-force, actually, without getting any brain damage. And the most interesting one, I think, is actually how long their tongues are. So if anybody hasn't Googled it, I would highly recommend Googling Woodpecker Tongue, and you'll see a really great diagram of it. Their tongue actually wraps all the way around the back of their skull and to the top of their forehead. And so that's where it actually attaches, is like up here. So, and that just like acts like a safety harness for the brain as it's, you know, pounding into the tree. Their skull also has an elongated brain case. And that shape is just in general better for receiving G-forces. And then lastly, instead of having a liquid surrounding their brain like we do, their brain is tightly fitted into their skull. So there's not very much wiggle room there. And there's several other adaptations as well, but those are kind of the big ones, with the tongue being absolutely the most interesting, I think.
Yeah, that one's very fascinating to think about for sure. You're getting lots of great compliments. Everyone's saying you really know your stuff. Very impressed. We have one more question from CJ. He asks, how many birds did you relocate to Jonathan Dickinson State Park? He lives in Palm Beach County, and they're excited to have the RCWs back.
Yeah, so we moved, you're going to test me. It was either 4 pairs or 5 pairs. I believe, though, that it was 5 pairs, so 10 total birds. Yeah, it was 10. So we moved 10 birds into 5 sites, and I believe that they had created 12 sites for them to choose between. So sometimes if you move a bird, they won't specifically stay in the tree you put them in, because they've got their own ideas about what's good habitat. So yeah, we usually always have a backup site or 2 available every time we translocate. So, and from what I've heard, they're doing well over there. Several of them have been spotted since the translocation.
That's very exciting. Thank you so much for answering all of these really great questions. So you can tell everybody really enjoyed your presentation and learned a lot, and you've really got them thinking about the RCWs and their habitat here.
Well, that is great. Like I said, I love doing this. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys about it. So now it's my turn actually to ask questions about some things to you guys. You are the Florida Native Plant Society. And while I love flowers and plants and all things botany, I am a very terrible botanist, like I mentioned earlier. So very frequently what I'll do as I'm in the woods and I don't know what something is I will take pictures. And then the intention is to go onto the Florida Plant Atlas or somewhere else and find out what it is that I saw. But what usually ends up happening is hundreds of pictures end up on a backlog of stuff that I just have seen but never bothered to get identified. So I've actually got a couple slides for you guys, and please unmute yourselves and help me out. I've got 3 slides with 6 or 7 plants on them, and I'd love to know what they are. So here we go. Does anybody know what these 2 flowers are? I have seen both of these growing in big cypress.
Please feel free to unmute if you'd like to give a guess or an identification.
Isn't the one on the left a dayflower?
You're close, Wade. I recognize your voice, I think. Similar color. This is one that I've seen and wet prairies and like corkscrew and big cypress as well.
Yeah, this one was right along the edge of an inundated trail. So it was very wet, the blue one or the purplish one, whatever color you'd like to call that. And then the tall one was growing in a clump. There were actually many stems of it. This one was just kind of off by itself. So I got a complete picture.
Yes, yes. The one on the right tends to grow in colonies, for lack of a better word. But we've had a guess for the blue flower from
Okay.
Karen in the chat. She asks if it's sky flower, and I would say that I agree with that identification.
Well, I won't write it down because you're recording the presentation. I'll be able to get this later.
Yes, the one on the left is sky flower. It's one of my favorites, so I even know the scientific name, Hydrolia Corombosa.
Great. Well, a lot of botanists actually prefer using the Latin language, so that just throws me for another loop because I'm a bird person and we have standard common names, and that's usually what I'm most familiar and comfortable with.
That's right. Do we have any guesses for the plant on the right?
Come on, guys. I know you guys know this stuff. You have to, because I don't.
We've had a couple of guesses in the chat. I happen to know the plant in the right side photo as well.
Okay.
So I understand the guesses for sure. We've had a guess that it's lupine or something that starts with the word skull. And I know what they're thinking about. I know what plants they're thinking about. This one is in wetter habitats too, right? With you spending lots of time in big cypress. Yeah, so the common name for the one on the right is wood sage.
Wood sage. Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Teucrium canadense is the scientific name for that one. And I really like wood sage because you can even see in the picture the newer flowers start off pink and then they kind of fade to yellow. So the bottom flowers are more of a yellow color. Those are the older flowers.
Okay.
It's very eye-catching.
Yes, very much so. Well, thank you. All right, so next slide here. I've got this like tiny flower on a really long stem that had these little tubes coming out of it. Some kind of what I think is an orchid, but I don't know what species.
Yes. And for the photo on the left, I'm pretty sure we've got somebody in the audience who's quite familiar with this flower.
All right. Don't be shy. I've been talking for so long. It's your turn.
Okay, we've got things coming in from the chat. So the plant on the left, one of the common names is salt and pepper.
Okay.
And I'm also familiar with this plant on the left. I'm not as confident with the orchid on the right, but we have some guesses for that as well.
Okay.
So the one on the left, one of its common names is salt and pepper because of the white and black colors. So the white and the florets on the flower head, and then the darker color you can kind of see in the middle. Those are black anthers. So the structure that releases the pollen is actually black for this flower. Snow square stem is another common name for it.
Okay, great.
And then for the orchid on the right, we've got a guess for a type of Sparanthes orchid. And then we've got longhorned false rain orchid.
Okay.
Which is very specific. And I'm not as confident with this orchid, so.
Okay. This was actually an orchid we found in Picayune Strand. So, and then I believe the flower on the left was also big cypress, but I'm not 100% sure. All of these were here in South Florida though, all of them. So, and I've got one more slide for you with just 3 flowers on it.
All right, so we've got a yellow flower on the left, pinkish flower top right and purple flower bottom right.
Mm-hmm.
Keeping an eye on the chat. So we have a guess for the yellow one. It could be a species of Linum. Linum would be the genus name.
Okay.
And then we've got a guess for the bottom right, the purple one, Everglades water willow. And I agree on the purple one for sure. I'm water willow. I've definitely heard for the common name.
Okay.
It's a species of Justicia, if I'm saying the genus name correctly.
And I'm not sure if this is helpful or a hint for anybody, but the one that is on the top right is a few weeks post burn. So you can kind of see the clump of grass behind it is charred with a few green sprigs coming out. So whatever it is, it likes to emerge after fire.
Keeping an eye on the chat. I believe I am familiar with the one, the pink one you were just mentioning. To me, that looks like pine pinklet. I don't know the scientific name by heart for that one, but it's small and grows close to the ground, right?
Yeah, it looks. I don't know. I only saw it this one day.
Yeah.
It looks very small. So, I mean, you can see the pine needles next to it for reference.
Yes. Yeah, so I'm thinking pine pinklet for the top right. We've got the Everglades water willow. And then in the chat, we've added Justicia angusta for the full scientific name.
Okay.
That's for the purple one. And then the yellow one, it could very well be a linum, as was suggested in the chat. It's possible it could also be Pyrrhicetta, is another genus name. I think the common name for the Pyrrhicetta is pitted stripe seed. It's actually in the passion flower family, but it doesn't vine like a passion flower.
Okay.
The passion flowers you typically think of. So.
Well, I'm a lot closer knowing everything about these flowers than I was an hour ago. So I certainly appreciate you guys taking a look at that.
This was fun. This was a great idea on your part to poll the audience to, get the group knowledge and some plant identifications, or, leading you in a direction to start investigating.
Yes. So. And would you guys recommend the Florida Plant Atlas as like the prime go-to way of finding out what you find in the woods, what it is?
I personally use the Florida Plant Atlas online a lot. If anyone hasn't gone to that, if you Google Florida Plant Atlas, you'll go right to it. It's managed by the University of South Florida. And it has the current scientific names for all of the plant vouchers that they have for the state of Florida. So as long as someone has submitted a specimen of a particular plant from a particular county, it'll show up in that database. Also in the chat, we've got using iNaturalist to help. It's kind of the similar idea to polling the audience in this meeting, but anyone who's using iNaturalist can confirm identifications. We've got the Complete Guide to Florida Wildflowers, or the Everglades Wildflowers in particular, by Roger Hammer. I use those a lot myself. Recommending good old-fashioned field guides first, and then using the Florida Plant Atlas if someone's really unsure where to start.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for the lesson.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for the presentation. This has been really fun and a little more interactive than our online meetings have been so far. So thank you for introducing that aspect.
Certainly. Well,
we've got just one last recommendation for you. There's also the Institute for Regional Conservation. If you haven't heard of that group before, they've started in the southeast part of Florida, but they're expanding their database. And I think they cover Southwest Florida pretty well too, and they're starting to work their way up the state for the species that they have information for. So they have photos and habitat and some propagation notes and lists of natural areas where these different plants can be seen. So that's another great recommendation.
Great. Well, thank you.
All right. So on that note, I think we'll wrap up our meeting for tonight. Thank you, Jessica, once again for a wonderful presentation. And thank you to everybody who attended the meeting tonight. You guys are awesome. Have a wonderful evening. And
Thanks.
we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
You too. Bye, everybody.